All right. Thank you, Father Jim. And Jim, I want to thank you so much for all that you've done at Rainforest Action Network over the years. I love you, and I miss working with you every day. Rainforest Action. I want to also thank my friends Kenny and Nina for inviting me here to speak with all of you, but more importantly, for creating Bioneers. Kenny and Nina, you are like these mad chemists coming up with the ideal concoction of inspiration, intellectual rigor, emotional stimulation that I think, if you feel like I do, makes it virtually impossible to come to Bioneers and not be inspired and not be energized. Is that right? Yeah. And also, it's great to be here on a Friday. It's great to be here and follow Pachamama Alliance, good friends at Amazon Watch. It's really inspiring once again to see the leaders from Sarayaku. And I have to say, the Girl Scout leaders, Madison and Rhiannon, we're with them, right? Yeah. Absolutely. So, hi, Michael Brune. It's great to be here with all of you. If we could go to some slides, I want to show a couple pictures. You know, the Sierra Club has chapters in every state around the country, so I do a fair amount of traveling. And anytime I come to the Bay Area, it feels like home. So it feels like right now I'm talking to my family, a very big, large family, but it feels like home. So I figured I would start with a little shot of Mary and the kids. I wanted to share this picture with you. This was taken of my very, very pregnant wife just about a month ago. And I wanted to show it because Mary and I have had lots of conversations years ago about whether to have kids, and more recently about what it's like to be parents in modern times. And how do we talk with our kids as they're learning about the world that they're going to inherit, as they're hearing about climate change? How do you have this conversation? How do you simultaneously present a very clear, realistic, rational look at the world, but also let them know that they can change it, that their future isn't sealed, that their fate is not predetermined? I remember a few years ago, before our eldest daughter, Olivia, was born, she's now 8, Mary and I were down at a sound stage in Los Angeles, and we were there watching a presentation by Al Gore as he was preparing it for An Inconvenient Truth. And I remember sitting next to Mary. She had a belly just like what you see here, and we were thinking about being new parents for the first time. And I remember she was squeezing my hand so hard as we're watching his presentation. And I remember being terrified. Terrified. About what the world would look like when Olivia was 10 years old, and 20 years old, 25 years old. And since then, what's happened, right? For now 20 years, we've been hearing from my good friend Bill McKibben, James Hansen, right? We've been seeing this. We've been hearing from Terry Root down at Stanford. We've been hearing from Michael Mann, climate scientists all across the world, sounding the alarm about climate change. So I want to take just a couple minutes to remind us what we're fighting for, what we're talking about. All right, so you may not have seen a National Academy of Sciences study that came out on Monday, talking about how because the Earth's temperature has warmed so much, because water temperature around the world has warmed so much, we now can expect 100-year hurricane events every 10 years. Right? So hurricane-like powerful storms will be happening with more frequency and more intensity. Just this year in Beijing, I'm only going to do this for a few minutes. Just this year in Beijing, 21 inches of rain fell in just a few hours. In Burma and in Thailand, 100,000 people were killed because of violent and extreme storms. In Bangladesh, there have been almost permanent flooding that's displaced hundreds of thousands of people. It's happening every year. What's happening in the Arctic is a crime. Wildfires all across the country right now. Some of the worst wildfires in our history. In Texas, California, Idaho, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, all across the country. And drought. We've got 60% of our country facing severe drought. This doesn't just impact water supplies, it impacts farmers, it impacts food supplies, it impacts the stability of how we relate to each other as a country and around the world. Shortages of corn and wheat and soybeans, exacerbating world hunger, driving up food prices. More than 400,000 people died because of climate-related causes in 2010. And if we don't arrest this, if we don't reverse this course, 2010 will be considered a great year. So make no mistake, the threat of climate disruption is real. It's powerful. It's right there in front of us. And it's being caused by real people with names and jobs and families. But these are the villains in the story. All right? These are the CEOs, the lobbyists, the politicians who don't have a soul, PR flacks, media manipulators. These are the folks who are working relentlessly to make sure that we are extending our dependence on fossil fuels. But what I want to say is that these folks and the mindset that they have, that they represent, they're relics. These folks are holdouts. They represent a mindset that won't survive in the 21st century. So what I want to say is that we should not underestimate these folks. They have a lot of power, but we have more. They have power, but we have more. And we are already creating a world that will be irresistible. So what I would like to do is I want you to envision a future of clean air, blue skies, restored landscapes, a future built on clean energy prosperity. And I want to start this by telling you something that's a little counterintuitive. I know that you're probably one of the most well-informed audiences on the planet, most engaged audiences on the planet. But I want to talk about things that you might not know, that you might not fully appreciate, which is that we are reaching a tipping point. We're also reaching a tipping point on the fight against climate change, right? We're already closer. We are closer to living in the clean energy economy that we've been talking about for decades. I'm going to tell you exactly how that's happening and exactly why it's happening. But the beautiful future that we've envisioned is already coming to reality in the present. The future has become the present. It's here and it's now. So let me not show him for just a second. That's much better, don't you think? So, all right, let me go and I got to do it. I'm sorry. But I want to ground this in reality. I'm not just throwing rhetoric at you. So I want to tell you some stories about why I think this is true. Actually, it's not why I think it is true. It is true. Okay. So we know that we're still recovering from the effects of the worst environmental administration in our country's history. So I want to talk to you a story about how we have prevailed against fossil fuels. The story starts in 2001 when the Bush-Cheney administration took office. They were the most fossil fuel friendly administration in our country's history. One of the things that they proposed to do was to guarantee that our country would be powered by coal well into the 21st century. And so they proposed to build 150 new coal-fired power plants all across the country, in almost every state. Big ones, massive coal plants. And coal-burning utilities got so excited about this, they said, yeah, let's do it, let's go for it. And they added about 50 more individual coal plant proposals. So at one point, there were more than 200 coal plants that were about to be built everywhere across the country. and it would have guaranteed, it would have locked in the dirtiest source of power that we've ever seen. I don't have to tell you, you guys know that coal is dirty, it's dangerous, it's deadly. Where it's mined, where it's burned, the coal ash that's deposited on landscapes all across the country. James Hansen calls it the biggest contributor to climate disruption all around the country, all around the world. So what happened? We began to rise up. In Illinois, one of the first plants that were proposed was the Endek coal plant, about 50 miles south of Chicago. And the Sierra Club, we had a volunteer named Verena Owen, who's a firecracker, mother of 4, grandchildren of, I don't know, 6 or 8 kids by now. And she had never taken on a coal plant in her life. She never looked at a coal permit before. She didn't even know how to find one, how to study one, how to resist one. But she said, we're going to defeat this coal plant. And she teamed up with a brilliant Sierra Club lawyer called Bruce Nilles. And they began to organize. They began to study these permits. They began filing briefs. They began filing suits against the air permit that had been filed by the utility. They began to organize. They began to bring in healthcare professionals, educate reporters, educate town commissioners. They began to build a coalition. And they built that coalition, and it became an irresistible force. And they prevented that coal plant from being built. They then looked all around them and identified about 28 more coal plants scattered throughout Wisconsin, throughout the rest of Illinois, into Iowa, and across the upper Midwest. And they said, if we can defeat one, we can defeat 10, maybe we can defeat most of the plants that are being proposed. And so they did. They began barnstorming, building up local community groups, supporting community groups, saying, did you know there's going to be a plant in your backyard that will be built and it's going to impact your health? Did you know that it doesn't have to be that way? That we can rise above this. We can move beyond coal. There's a better future for us. It'll make your air cleaner, your water cleaner. It'll put more people to work. And we don't have to be wed to this future if we don't want to. So together with fence line community groups, environmental justice groups, civil rights organizations, healthcare professionals, they built a regional coalition. And they defeated more than 24 of those proposed coal plants. And then they built a national coalition. Word got out that we don't have to have these coal plants, not in Illinois, not in Wisconsin, not anywhere. And so we built a coalition, we helped to build a coalition of literally hundreds of organizations all across the country. Some big national organizations and a lot of underpaid, underfunded individual activists, families, community groups who knew that there was a better way. We worked together with Governor Charlie Crist in Florida, and we defeated coal plants in Florida. We worked against Governor Rick Perry in Texas, and we defeated coal plants down in Texas. Right? We defeated coal plants on the eastern seaboard. We defeated coal plants on the western coast. We defeated coal plants in coal country. And together, over the last decade, a grassroots force, community organizations, individual people, everyday Americans, almost all volunteer-driven, people who had busy day lives, together, we defeated 170 proposed coal-fired power plants all across the country. And we're just getting started. So all those coal plants that were built, that prevented 600 million tons of carbon from entering the atmosphere, right? But that just stopped the rate at which things would have gotten worse. So over the last couple years, what we've done is we've identified the biggest, the oldest, the dirtiest, the ugliest coal plants in the country, and we've started to shut them down, right? We've retired the coal plant, we've secured the retirement of the coal plant in Centralia, South Central Washington, one of the biggest coal plants in the country. We've secured the retirement of the Boardman coal plant outside of Portland. We retired the Dealey coal plant in San Antonio, Texas. We've retired, just shut down last month, the 2 largest coal plants operating inside city boundaries in the country, the Fisk and Crawford coal plants in Chicago, affecting more people than any other coal plants in the country. They were shut down 3 weeks ago. So this is what I'm talking about. Coal is coming down. right? Right? 124 coal plants in just the last 2 years. That's 14% of the fleet. In the next 2 years, we will have secured the retirement of at least a third of the coal plants in the country. All right. So here's what you might not know. What all this means, what all of this adds up to, is the fact that we are reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the US. We've already capped our emissions, and they're starting to come down. Greenhouse gas emissions right now are where they were 20 years ago. We've already reduced them to 1992 levels. Okay? It's already been done. It's already been done. Right? So once we start, we're not going to go back. Once we start winning, we're not going to turn back. We don't have to give in to pessimism. You don't have to give in to cynicism. If we can defeat a coal plant in Kentucky, and another one in Tennessee, another one in Texas, we can do anything. Okay? So what this means in the United States, according to the International Energy Agency, is that the United States, over the last 6 years, we have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country on the planet. More than any other country. Another little piece of good news. You know what that is? Fracking. Fracking. The other piece of good news, what's happening across the country, and this is not because of any national environmental group, sometimes it's in spite of any national environmental group, is that we have built, we have seen, we have witnessed, some of us have been a part of the most spontaneous, most enthusiastic, most determined, most fierce grassroots movement across the country who are saying no to fracking. They've convinced Governor Cuomo not to frack New York. And it's just like what's happening with coal. It's just like what's happening with coal. You know what this is? Tar sands pipeline. How about those folks down in Texas? Okay, so you know the Sierra Club is not a part of this demonstration, but the Sierra Club, we have done press conferences down in Texas with the Tea Party against this pipeline. Okay? With the Tea Party. Right? So this is not just a movement of Bay Area do-gooders. Right? It's not just a movement of environmentalists. This is a movement of people, of humans. Full stop. And do you know why this is happening? The reason why it's happening is that the spell has been broken. The spell has been broken. People across the country, they're seeing windmills when they go for a drive. They're seeing their friend with solar panels up on their roof. They're reading stories about what's happening in other states. And they're realizing that we don't need this anymore. We don't have to cut the country in two with a big pipeline that goes up to Canada. Right? We don't have to blow our mountains apart for a little bit of coal. We don't have to run the risk of being able to set our tap water on fire because of gas. There's a better way. And it's not just an idea, that better way, but it's a better way that's being embraced by their neighbors, and by their churches, and by other cities and states all across the country. So we know that we can burn less, we know that we can collect more, right? And so, I haven't been changing my pages as I've been talking. And so, what I wanted to say to you is that we want to burn less and collect more. And we, pause, drink water. And we know it's possible. I want to tell a real short story about some of my friends in the solar industry. What they're telling me, folks at Singevity, I was talking with them the other day, and what they were saying is that some of the best referrals that they have in their customer base, people who decide to put solar panels up on their own roof and then encourage their friends and family and church members and others to do the same, some of their best referrals are Tea Party members, right? Really, down in Arizona, down in Texas. These are folks who, some of whom believe in climate change, some of whom who don't. But they think that it's a great opportunity. They don't see necessarily the obligation to act on climate change. They see the opportunity to invest in clean energy. And so In Iowa, windmills are now supplying more than 25% of our power in the entire state. In South Dakota, it's almost 30%. 9 states across the country get at least 10% of their power from wind. How many folks here saw the news from Germany earlier this year, where on sunny days in Germany this summer, they were getting 50% of their power coming from the sun? See that? Okay, I got something for you. All right, so last month, the second largest wind farm in the country, Shepherd's Flat, was installed, was finalized in Oregon. All right, happened last month. 3 days ago, on Tuesday morning, on a windy day, early in the morning, there was enough wind blowing through Oregon and through the state of Washington. There's enough wind blowing that it met the power needs of the largest utility, Bonneville Power Administration, to meet 85% of the power demand. 85%. This isn't a tiny little utility. BPA supplies power to 3/4 of the Pacific Northwest. So all those people, 85% of their power was coming from wind. All right? We are turning the tide. Believe it. We are turning the tide. Don't believe folks when they say that we need coal, even if they're running for president. Don't believe people when they say if you don't have coal, you gotta have gas. Don't believe folks who say you gotta have some coal, you gotta have some nukes, you gotta have some gas, you gotta keep drilling for oil. Don't believe it. Don't believe it. It's not true. All right, so I want to tell a little story about where I grew up. This is New Jersey. It wasn't intended as a punchline, folks. It isn't New Jersey, but I did grow up in New Jersey on the beach, and I spent most of the years when I was a kid at the beach. And when I was a kid, the biggest environmental risk was hypodermic needles coming from hospital waste dumped offshore. And then there was this big fat chemical plant in Toms River, New Jersey that has produced one of the largest cancer clusters in New Jersey that was able to dump their raw chemical wastes straight into the ocean. So I would come out of the water, I was 8, 10, 12, 14 years old, and I'd come out of the water some days with rashes, itchy rashes. And for a while then, the beaches were closed, sometimes for a couple days, sometimes for a couple weeks, once for an entire summer. And so a lot of folks, a lot of people, a lot of my neighbors say, this is how it's going to be. We're just going to have a dirtier future. It's going to be an uglier future. We have to find a way to get around it. So some folks would go and they'd plug their nose and they'd plug their ears and they'd wear wetsuits even though it was July and it was 95 degrees because they wanted to have access to the water. But a lot of other folks said, no way. We're not going to live like this. And so they began to organize. Greenpeace came in and plugged the pipe and said, you're not dumping anymore, right? And then local groups began canvassing, knocking on doors, and we fought, and we organized, and we fought some more, and we organized, and we won. And we won. Hospital waste dumping was banned off the coast of New Jersey. I go there every year, and my kids visit their grandparents. We all go swimming together. You go up to your shoulders, and you can see your feet once again. Right? I think we all have stories in our personal lives about redemption, about resiliency, about recovery. What we're talking about here is an industrial-sized story of redemption, and we can do it. Here is what's happening right now in the world, right? If you can have a little 8-year-old girl on an iPad watching a rocket being launched, landing on Mars, pulverizing rocks with lasers, then you realize we don't have to be hogtied to a fossil fuel vision from back in the 19th century. We can accomplish so much. Here's a picture of John Muir, the founder of the Sierra Club, with Teddy Roosevelt. And imagine what it was like in 1892. I'm sure people said, hey, John, dude, how are you going to stop the logging industry? The logging industry, they've got a chokehold on Congress. You're not going to be able to protect this place. The mining industry, they're going to get into the Sierras. But we saved it. And it was everyday folks who worked together to finally get the president to come visit, to save Yosemite Valley, to extend protection all across the range. So I started my talk talking about climate disruption. I figured I would end it on sleep disruption. This is Genevieve. And this is Genevieve. She's 23 days old, our little girl, our little angel. And her middle name represents our faith in all of you. And in what we can do together. Thanks.